Hello and welcome to another tutorial by LevelUp Networks. Today I'm going to show you how to set up a DHCP server. So essentially, just to get some background in case you don't know, DHCP is essentially what gives the IP addresses to your network. So at the moment we have our virtual Windows 10 machine with a static IP. So once we set up the DHCP server, our Windows Server 2019 is going to be leasing these IP addresses to all our virtual environments. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is open Server Manager. And from there we need to install the new feature, the new role for the DHCP. So in that case, we are going to go to Manage. We're going to go to Add Roles and Features. And we're going to go Next. So as we did before when we installed the Active Directory, we want to do a role-based or feature-based installation, which is the default. So we make sure it's ticked and click on Next. And so this is the only server currently on our network. So we have it already pre-selected, so we just hit Next again. And as you can see here, we have the option for DHCP server. So we just tick this. We add features. We go Next. And this is in case you wish to install any further features with this. We don't at this particular time. So we're just going to go Next. And Next again. And we're going to click on Restart, which means obviously if it's necessary, the server will automatically restart once the DHCP server installation has concluded. And we go to Install. Now this can come in very handy, especially if you have a few machines. Obviously, in our case, it's not ultimately necessary because we just have one virtual Windows 10 machine. But let's say this is an on-premise server and you wish to have your server manage all these roles and features for you instead of your router, you can do that. And it's also a very easy way to have easy access management to all your devices. So from the DHCP server, not only can you lease the IP addresses, but you can set up all the other settings, like for example, what the gateway is, what the DNS servers are. You can set up static IPs by MAC address. So there's quite a few very interesting features with it. And once it installs, what we do is that we'll need to obviously set it up, which I will show you very shortly once it concludes the installation. Now we're just past the halfway mark. This is not as large as the Active Directory, so it shouldn't take too much longer for it to conclude. Obviously, when you do these installations, for example, DHCP server in this case, you don't need to be just looking at the screen. You can literally close it, and you can continue on working with other things on the server should you deem necessary, and then you'll get a prompt saying that's all installed. And like I said, if it requires a restart of the machine, it will let you. So at this point, it has already concluded. It tells us here that installation was completed successfully. But as you can see here, we also have the DHCP configuration, which we'll now click on. So let's click on this. Now this is just the description. Perfect. So this is essentially, it's asking you which account it should use to authorize or to sort of promote the server to be able to run the DHCP. So we're going to use just our local, not local, but our domain administrator. So it's the one we're logged in with. Alternatively, you can use another login. You can, so alternative credentials, or you can skip the AD authorization. But obviously, if you skip the Active Directory authorization, when you start the server, you'll need to specify what account has access to it. So we will commit our account for it. And that's done. And we can now close this. Okay, so we have 2 notifications here. Feature installation, all done. Fine. So we can just dismiss them so they don't show there. All right. So you can do all the DHCP from the server manager. It just shows you, excuse me, what servers are here, if you have any events or any errors. So we're going to close it. I mean, from here, you can actually go to the DHCP manager itself, but let's close it and let's do it like if server manager was not open. So very simply, go start menu, and under the Windows administrative tools, like everything else, you will now see that we have that DHCP, which is here. So let's click on that. So there we go, that has opened. Let's just make it a bit more clear for everyone. So under DHCP, if you had multiple servers, it would display all the servers you have. In this case, we just have one, so we'll expand it. And like I told you before, you have the option to set up with IPv6 or IPv4. So we're going to concentrate with IPv4, so we're going to expand this. And the first thing we're going to go is to server options. Okay. Now, from server options, we have to obviously configure the options. So you just right click it and you go to configure options. So once the server options open, from here you can select what you want to configure. So essentially every time a computer uses the DHCP to get its IP address, it will also get all these details from it. Okay, so the ones we really care about right now is the router, which essentially will be your gateway. So we are going to tick this. And the router, obviously, there are some servers that can act as a router, or you can just put, for example, if your actual physical router has a fully qualified name, you can put it here and it will resolve it. Now, because our router or our gateway is essentially our virtual host adapter through VirtualBox, we're just going to put the IP address. So the IP address for our subnet is 192.168.150, and the actual gateway is 1. So we will add that. Perfect. Our DNS servers. So our DNS servers, you can use as many IPs as you wish, although it would just show the first 3 when you do the IP config. So the first one should always be your server itself. So it's 192.168.150.10. So it's validating. So what this does is just make sure that that IP address is actually valid. Then we're going to put DNS Google, which is all 8s. And that's it. So as you can see, it's putting them accordingly as you add them. So first come, first serve. And let's just put finally just another IP address from Google, which is 8.8.4.4. And that's that. We add that. Perfect. And from here, we could potentially put a host name, but that's not really necessary. I pretty much think that is all. We could put the time to live if we wanted, but that's not really necessary. Yeah, that's it. That's all we need. Okay, so press OK. Right, so after we do the server options, what we're going to do is that we're going to set the scope for our DHCP policy, essentially. So we're going to tell it from what IP array IP to what IP. So for example, what's the beginning IP to what's the last IP that the DHCP server should give. So for example, it's very recommended that you keep a few IPs just in case you need to add more static IPs later on. So for example, our server's .10, but if you want our gateway's .1, let's say you want to add a photocopier machine, you can set it to a static IP, or then I'll show you how you would do it to set it to the MAC address. So let's say if our server is .10, so that gives us from 1 to 10. In between those are all free IPs, because 1 is used and 10 is used, but 2 up to 9, those are not used. So potentially through there we could put other servers. So because we don't have that many machines, we can start our DHCP lease from 50, let's say, or 25. So we go to IPv4 and we right click it. We go to new scope. Then we go next. So this will be put the name of it. So LevelUp DHCP scope, for example, and we go next. So here it tells us from which IP should it start. So we'll say from 192.168.150.25, and it automatically calculates, as you can see, the subnet mask, which you can change if you wish, but 24 is fine. So this will give us essentially up to 254 IP addresses. We don't need that many, and that's why we're going to start from 25 and we're going to finish it at 200. Okay. So essentially, like I said earlier, between 1 and 10, 1 and 10 are used, but you have 2 through 9, those are unused, and then from 201 up to 254, those are also unused IP addresses. So once we finish this, we go next. Okay, so here you can add exclusions. Let's say, for example, that you already have a printer, it's set up, and that is on the IP address 100. So here you can say, okay, you know what? If when you reach to 99, the next computer jump the 100, so ignore it. So the next one will be 101. We don't have that in this case, so we're just going to click next. And this is how long you want the lease to last. By default, they put 8 days. You can put it as much as you want, essentially. But yeah, 8 days is more than enough. So what that means, in 8 days, if your machine is going to send a request to your server for a new IP address. Now, because it's going to cancel its own IP, and then that IP becomes available. So it's going to get essentially the same IP address. But, let's say, for example, while it does within those milliseconds, it loses the IP, another machine comes online, and that grabs the IP, then it will get the next one available. So we go to next. So here it goes, configure Dhcp options, which we already have, sort of, but we will press yes. We wish to configure these options now for Dhcp. Now, here essentially it's going to give you the same options that we had earlier for server options. So it does no harm to put them again. So it's asking us for the router. So once you say 150.1, add, next. Now the parent domain is essentially your host name. So it's your domain name, full qualified domain. As you can see, it has already imported our IP addresses from this, with the exception of the third one, which is absolutely fine. We'll leave it as is. Then next. Now we don't have a Win server, so we're just going to ignore that. And you wish to activate this scope now? Yes. So next, and finish. Okay. So as you can see, it's created now another folder, which is scope. And this is the scope we just created. Now from here, you will see the address pool. So what we're saying here is that the IP's address that will be given out are from .25 up to 200. Here we're going to see if there's any leases. So at the moment, because our Windows 10 is not using the DHCP server, it won't be there. And this is where you put the reservation. So for example, where would you use the reservation? You would use a reservation, for example, if you need one particular machine to have an IP address, be it a computer, be it another server, be it a photocopier. So this is where you would get the MAC address from that particular machine. and you would put it here. So how would you find the MAC address of a computer, for example? Well, it's very easy. So once you log in into the machine, you would go into command prompt. And if you go to ipconfig/all, okay, you will get the physical address. Now this physical address is essentially the MAC address. Now, even if this computer does not have a network, be it you don't have anything connected to it or it has a misconfiguration, it will still show you the MAC address, okay? Now, another way to find the MAC address is also if you log into the computer, you can go into right-click on the actual network card. You open Internet and Settings. You go to Ethernet in this case. You click on the network. And there you go, the physical address in the bottom once again, okay? Now, we're not going to add one here. Well, we are, but not right now because we're going to get, excuse me, the physical address of the Windows 10 machine, and that's when we're going to add it. So first we're going to put the physical machine with DHCP, and I'll show you how it gets a new IP address. Then we're going to add the MAC address, and we're going to see if it gets the IP address we assign it. Scope options, these are the things that we already added. And then if you want to add any particular policy, which we don't. So that's from the server side. So let's load up our Windows 10 machine. Let's do that now. Start it. Let's put back our server. And we'll put the Windows 10 machine on top of it. Okay. So as you can see, it's very easy to set up the Dhcp. Also, you have to be very careful. I didn't mention this earlier, but obviously, usually when you set up a router for your internet, that will give you DHCP. So please ensure that if you're going to set up DHCP in the server, that the DHCP is turned off on the router, and the same applies for the other way around. So obviously, you know, if you have I can't speak, I'm sorry. If you have two DHCP servers running at the same time, the machines are just going to get confused and they're going to be losing connectivity all the time, as they will be getting, you know, conflicting IP addresses, and it's just one big mess. Right. So let's log in here. Now I'm going to log in as administrator, not because I have to, but when I do, actually no, I don't need to, because you don't need to be an administrator for this. So we'll log in with Sarah. Let's log in, password. Oh. Okay. So this machine actually has now a static IP, which I set up when we did the whole Active Directory side of things. So let's go to the command prompt and I'll show you. So if I go ipconfig/all, oops, it's not typing. So ipconfig /all. So as you can see here, it says DHCP enabled and it says no. Okay, so we got an IP address here as 192.168.50. So we're going to turn on the DHCP. So the easiest way, once again, right click on the internet network logo or icon, sorry, open networking settings. We will go to change adapter options. Right click, properties. You see, I do need to be administrator. Okay, no worries. I'll put it here, the password. Okay, so then we go to Internet Protocol version IPv4 properties, and here I've set it up all manually. So I'm going to use obtain IP automatically, and obtain DNS. Okay, close. Fantastic. So as you can see, we still have network. So before we were 192.168.150.50. So let's see what we have now. So now it's saying DHCP is enabled. Perfect. But now our IP address is the first one from the range we selected. It's 192.168.150.25. Okay. And you can see now that the DNS servers are up to the line. The gateway is perfect. The lease is 8 days from today. That's exactly the same time I did it. Right, so let's say this we want, for some reason, a static IP for this. So let's just copy the physical MAC address. So I'll select it and right-click. I'll then go to the server. And we'll do a reservation. So we'll right-click a reservation, new reservation. Let's just make sure the MAC address paste. Perfect. So we will call this as Windows 10 machine. Call it whatever you want. This is the description of it. Cool. And just for this purpose, let's make it IP address 150.100. And the description will be the same. Now, the MAC address. Don't leave it as you copied it because that's not going to work. So, as you can see here, it's 2 numbers or 2 characters, can be letters as well, and there's a dash between every 2 digits. So this needs to be a colon. So the colon is literally the 2 dots. So we're going to substitute the line by colons. Perfect. And here what supported devices is DHCP or boot TP. I believe it's both always. It makes no difference. So add. Okay, so the MAC address actually is wrong. So let's put no. Okay, yes, I remember. Actually, it's no colons. So it's literally when you get this originally, just delete all the lines and leave it without anything between the digits and add it, and there you go. So it's not going to give you a confirmation. It will only let you know if something is wrong. So in this case, when it blanks everything, that means that it's gone through. So if we go close, there we see it. So now we can see that this IP address is actually reserved for Windows 10 machine. So if we go into it, these are the settings that are going to be sent over. Now let's say, for example, you put the wrong MAC address. So you go here to properties. Okay, so you would go back into it and you can change it, okay, just in case. The only thing you won't be able to change, obviously, because you're editing the properties for this IP address, is the actual IP address. Everything else you can change. So now in theory, if we renew our IP address on our Windows 10 VirtualBox machine, it will change the IP address to .100. So let's go back into Windows. So right now, if I go ipconfig, let's forget the all, it'll still give us the same. So if we renew it, so ipconfig/renew, gave us an error. But let's see if that, okay. So it did give us an error. And that's just because of the way the VirtualBox network card maybe is set up. But if you can see, after we did ipvconfig, it gave us the correct IP. We set it to 100. Okay, so now you've seen how to set up the DHCP server, how to enable it on your Windows 10 machine should you would have had a static IP on it, how to set up a reservation, and those are just the basics of DHCP. Obviously, as I said before, you can add as many reservations as you want. You can change and configure it as you wish, but that's just the basics of how to install a DHCP server with Windows 2019. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care. To get the latest tutorials, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until then, take care.